So our first speaker is Graeme and Tiffany. Sorry. Graeme and Tiffany is a researcher, trainee lecturer, education consultant, and he works in the UK. He's specially interested with detached youth work and street-based work, and the social policy, information, education, and democratic education. So thank you.
So, am I good to begin?
Yes, you are.
Splendid, splendid.
Thank you.
Okay, as you might imagine, I've got a couple of pictures, so let me just try and sort that out first.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, I better not show you all of them because some of them I best not see. Anyway, I have got a title. What can we learn from working in the context of COVID-19 that can make post-pandemic youth work better than it was before? I say post-pandemic because, of course, it's in this last week that we were given a roadmap. Wherever that takes us, I don't know, but perhaps we might use the word pandemia instead, post-pandemia. Pandemia is the kind of culture that's affected by pandemic, so the wider context rather than just the clinical thing. Pandemia, I did have to look that up actually. It's an interesting word. It's the kind of word that's probably been taken out of the Oxford English Dictionary because it's so unpopular, although it might have got a bit of a boost because of recent events. But there are words that we know are added to the Oxford English Dictionary every year just because they become popular. I guess lockdown will be in the next edition. I do hope though that we don't put social distancing into the Oxford English Dictionary next year, because I've always felt that it was one of the worst of phrases really. The last thing we need at a time like this is social distancing, physical distancing certainly, but not social distancing. It seems to me that we need to keep connected socially as more now than ever before. So that leads me to think about the very fact that here we are connected by this extraordinary digital, online, virtual world today, which has become so common to our everyday activities. And I don't think I'm alone in having grumbled a bit about having to do everything online. I did write an article, you can find it on my website if you're interested. It was called Thoughts on the Value of Human Presence, where I argue there is something really quite essential about being in contact with people. You know, we know what people say, we're talking about being able to give our loved ones a hug and whatever else. So there's something intrinsically valuable about human presence. But of course, what we've learned is that we need a caveat to that, and the caveat would be in the right circumstances. So we've lived a life for a year almost in which the extraordinary kind of concept of respect has meant that to be respectful, we have to keep away from people. You know, I see people crossing the road to avoid me. Sometimes I think it's me, but I think, you know, there's somebody who's taking this seriously. It's respectful to move away. What a world, what a world. The point about that, of course, is that it's all about context, isn't it? So when it comes to working online, I hope that one of the things that we learn from the context of COVID is that sometimes these technologies are really quite super. And yet there might be other times when they're the last things that we need. So it's a reasonable question. I know there's quite a lot of us here today to ask who would be able to be present in Cardiff, in wherever it might have been today. And I'm sure we would actually have perhaps lost a few people because of all sorts of issues about accessibility, something perhaps to do with disabilities, perhaps even economic realities, just the cost of getting to a certain place to engage in a conversation like this. Poor public transport. I think about the people in the valleys where I can run bloody faster than the trains that come down from the valleys to Cardiff. And there are others who were simply time poor, and that makes it difficult for them to be physically present. So there's a sense that there is a value in getting together. The last time I actually talked in front of people, which I do like doing, was back in September when I went to Newcastle, and I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed it more because I hadn't done it for a while. But I've also, I have to say, been on a whole series of online conferences with colleagues in other countries that I wouldn't have ever been able to get to, and I certainly wouldn't have been able to justify flying to, because I am concerned about those kinds of issues. So there's a context, and hopefully as we move to post-pandemia, and of course the prospect is that COVID will end up like flu. We have to take it seriously, but it doesn't rule our lives. We might learn from these experiences about ways of better informing the practice of youth work. And I'm going to argue all sorts of other things as well. So where are we? What we've got and what we've had for quite a long time is the kind of narrative of getting back to normal. We need to get back to normal. And yet, when we think about this, think about it critically, might I say, the prospect of returning to normal in many spheres of our lives, I'm not sure it's a good thing at all. And then, of course, we've got the new normal, and that might get it into the dictionary, I don't know. So it's important to take a bit of time to ask, well, what was normal like? What was it like? And what does this new normal look like as well? You have to put your finger on it. You have to identify what we're talking about. And you have to do that, I would argue, if we're going to make any decisions about what we want the future to look like. And we might pick and mix a bit, hopefully, or whatever. But let's consider the South Wales context. We know that there are areas in South Wales, especially up in the valleys, where the deaths per capita population rates, they're the highest in the United Kingdom. Some of the highest in Europe, actually. And then we've got areas of South Wales that are head the rankings, frankly, of the greatest number of out of work benefit claimants and whatever else. There's terrible statistics, and but the point is that these kinds of issues and problems, they're not new. They're not new at all. They've been simply exacerbated by COVID. In the context that many of you guys are working on, there's a history of issues and problems of economic hardship, a high prevalence of poor health, folk dying years before they should. It's been pretty bad for a while, and COVID, as I said, has simply made it worse. So going back to normal, I mean, it seems unconscionable to me we want to go back to that. We need to work out how we're going to get in a direction that's better than it was, better than the normal before. So once again, it's all about contextualization, and you only can do contextualization if you think and think critically. We know what the broader context is. It's inequalities. And I hope that this frames, in a way, our understanding of the work that we need to do going forward. So that's the broader kind of analysis of context. But what about our context? What about our experience as workers? I mentioned a moment ago time. The fact that we've not travelled as much, the fact that we've been confined to our localities, often to our homes as well, has given us, almost all of us, it seems, a bit more time. Some of you know that I've got an academic interest in time, and I like the word temporality. Temporality is the sense of the experience of time, how times work, how time works. Time is slow, time is fast, whatever else, rapid. These are all temporal concepts. So I think what's been interesting about COVID is it's kind of disturbed normal temporalities. We haven't rushed around as much. And we've been closer to home. That's given us a bit more time to do other things, go for a walk, I don't know. Now, I have done work on webinars with school teachers, and we've discussed this issue. Some of them have said, many of them have said, well, you know what, I've had a bit more time. I mean, teachers are pretty busy people, youth workers are pretty busy people, but because of circumstances, they've had a bit more time. And I said, what have you done with this time? And they said, well, we've done some thinking. We've done some thinking about our job as teachers, as educators. I have to say, I remind them of the work of Michael Apple, the philosopher of education, who offers a theory of intensification in which he argues that teachers are deliberately given loads of work to do, often work that's some of which is unproductive, precisely because the aim is to keep them busy, so they don't have time to think, because many of them will conclude, Michael Apple says, that some of the education system at least is pretty crazy and needs some radical reform. So I think youth workers have also wade into this. Many of them have tried to learn, use the time that they've had to learn to engage with others. The Fed's webinars have been packed to the gills by people who want to discuss things, which is super. It reminds us, of course, very practically, about this thing that we all learned at college, which was called reflection. You know, and I don't find it quite ironic that all that reflective practice stuff, we studied it, but frankly, we became so busy that we never put it into practice. But I do, and I've always argued that it is essential to professional practice. Now then, so I've shown this to people before. It's one of my favourite images. I could ask you about a war. It's Socrates. It's Socrates. It was Socrates who said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And in other words, he might have said you need to do reflection. You need to do reflection. He also taught us that to be wise, you needed to do reflection. You needed to reflect on your experiences. Yeah, because it's only then that you become wise. It's no good just having experiences. You've got to reflect on them. So let's reflect a bit on our experiences. I should also say that, of course, Socrates argued that if you get into this positive habit of reflection, then what happens is your brain starts working in a certain way that when you come across new situations, your brain works better. And of course, in our language, in youth work, that means that if you reflect on action, you become better at reflecting in action. And I think about my times of getting home from detached youth work sessions and kicking my own butt because I wasn't thinking in the moment. Oh, I wish I'd have said that, or I wish I'd have done that. Yeah, that's the holy grail of youth work, being able to reflect in action. And if Socrates has got any commentary on this, it is that you've got to do the reflection on action when you've got a bit of time in order to get good in action. I also want to say that that's not just us, is it? Of course, I would argue that it's absolutely central to what youth work is. We're trying to encourage young people to do the same, which is precisely why we have to get good at it, because if we're going to encourage them to do it, you know, we need to know what we're talking about. So in COVID context, that means helping them, provoking them to reflect on their experiences of COVID so that they can contribute to an analysis of what's happened and participate in shaping the future of their youth work experiences. We're not short of good tools. This is a simple one, but it's one of my favourite ones. I call it the H diagram. Some people call it the rugby post diagram. I'm not bothered. But it's simple, but it's also got good theory behind it. And let me tell you about this theory. On the basis of conversations I have with youth workers who say to me so very often, well, we ask young people, I know, Graeme, you always encourage us to, you know, to work in a participative way. But you know what, when we ask young people what they want to do, they always say, I don't know, or duh, or something like that. This invites a kind of a cynicism about young people, and the last people who should be cynical about young people is youth workers. But my response to this set of stories is, do you know why? That's your fault, because this is the worst of questions. What you're failing to understand is that in asking young people what they want to do, that is a futures question. It's a question about the future. And all of us struggle from cold to answer questions about the future. So what you've got to do is you've got to ask questions about the lived experience, our past, in order to generate material with which we can then reflect on the future. So ask them about how their life is. What's it been like under COVID? And then you can ask about the future. Don't go to futures first. Now then, the material on which we reflect, can be used. This kind of methodology can be used in our work, and as I've said, in our own analysis. So, you buy one, you get one free. It's good for us, it's good for them. What's not to like? So let me talk again about my experiences, and which has very much involved talking to many hundreds of detached youth workers up and down the land for a long time now. And I go back to Socrates. So I've done a lot of training. I did so much training for people, but the bulk of those people, let me say, they're not detached youth workers. They're people whose histories of working in youth centres and clubs, and all those are shut. All those are shut, and they're saying, well, we want to go out. We want to go out. We're experienced, but we want to go out. What do we need to think about? And it is about thinking. You need, I argue, a different mindset to work outside. But let me just repeat that point a moment ago. The only game in town when it comes to face-to-face work is detached youth work. It has been for nearly a year. The centres have been largely, almost entirely, shut. So there's been a massive rise in interest in working outside. Pretty much all buildings have been shut. Everyone's become interested in detached youth work methods, or should I say detached methods, because detached has also become a feature of churches, community centres, all of which have had to shut as physical spaces. And now, of course, we've got detached COVID vaccination schemes. And this week, there's interesting stuff in the paper about a big project in the East End of London, unrelated to COVID, about taking out smear tests to women who are not coming forward in terms of their health. Everybody's interested in these kinds of methodologies. So what is it? What is it about these methodologies that have been proved to be so effective in the context of COVID-19? Bit of a provocative image, but of course what I'm trying to say is that what they've all got in common is that they constitute low threshold practices. The principle is that we're trying to make the things that we do, the services that we offer, as accessible as possible. If you put too many steps in front of people, too many doors to get through, young people are going to struggle to get through. That's a basic principle of outreach and detached youth work. We go out, we just make it easier. We work at times that are more accessible to people. So we're trying to get rid of as many of these thresholds as possible. And that makes things more effective, and I would argue more efficient. And this isn't just me talking from a sort of a UK point of view. I've done quite a few international webinars, and all across the world, in the north and the south, everybody says, yes, of course, it's the same way we are. There's a universality about the value of low threshold practices. Now, I'll go back to Socrates again. And when I'm doing training, one of the reasons why I show this is I say, what's significant about this image? And eventually, people talk about the fact that it's engaging with people and whatever else and so on and so on. But eventually people, and if I might just wiggle my cursor, they recognise that this over here is the sky. And the sky is significant in this image, as it is significant in detached youth work, because it demonstrates to us unequivocally and clearly that Socrates worked outside. And you have to work differently when you work outside. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that as soon as you go outside, unless of course you're a police officer, you have absolutely no formal authority. It's not like a teacher who has the possibility to put a child in detention or anything like that to work outside. You can't put anybody in detention. You can't send anybody home from the street. You have to learn to work with no formal authority. And of course, you can't assume any kind of audience. There is no captive audience in the street, as again, like pupils in the classroom. You've got to work for your audience. You've got to work for your audience. There's a kind of a peculiar purity about it. What that means is that in practice, on a street corner, if there are young people present, yeah, they are choosing to be there. So we know for sure that is their choice. And my word, I could tell you thousands of stories of young people walking away from me in my history. And also I can tell you stories about students who came to work with us, particularly in the near 10 years I worked in the East End of London, who became very disturbed about young people working away. And I would say, why are you disturbed about this? Oh, well, they don't like us or whatever else, all these kinds of things. And I said, don't be disturbed, because what these young people are demonstrating is power. Yeah, the very thing we're trying to encourage in young people. They're demonstrating their agency, their autonomy, the very things that we try to encourage them to be powerful, to take control of their lives and futures. And of course, it was Bernard Davies who asked us, in relation to the work that we do, is your practice proactively seeking to tip balances of power in young people's favour? It is a defining feature of youth work. So rare in the world of young people's experience that there are those who are actively trying to tip power in their favour. That's why youth work is a special and unique thing. There's a context to this, of course. It's about participation. I mentioned it before, but as a philosopher, I want to say there are thin and thick conceptualizations of participation. Thin means taking part. It's no more than taking part. I'm after a thick version of participation. This is the best one I've ever found in terms of definitions. It's a principle that those who will be affected by decisions must be involved in the making of those decisions. You know, clear. It's a principle that if you're affected, you should be involved. Now, you know, that in that sense, what's important is that what's happened under COVID needs to be understood through this participative context. What that means is that as youth workers have gone out, what they've done, and I want to argue actually quite unusually in recent times, is that they've trusted to the principle of participation. And what I mean by that is that the needs of young people have been largely and substantively determined by them, by those young people. So we've seen youth workers working in food banks, we've seen youth workers trying to find laptops so young people can do their online remote learning. We've seen youth workers delivering activity packs, trying to keep some fun in the system, all responding to the needs of those individuals. Now that all sounds straightforward enough, but I want to argue that is actually very different from a lot of the work that we've been doing in recent years, because what we've lived through for quite a while is a world in which the needs of young people have been determined externally, not by them internally on the basis of their intrinsic motivations. They've been determined extrinsically. What that means is usually there's some kind of contract flying around, and the contract says, okay, we want you youth workers to do X, Y, and Z. The needs of young people have been determined externally, and it's our job to get that kind of stuff into young people. It's become about fixing problems determined by others, doing tough, frankly, rather than working with. But what COVID has shown us is the whole of this has been turned upside down. There's been what I would call a revival of history. And we can go back to this very first recorded comment about detached youth work, which relates to a guy called Tarleton who worked more than 150 years ago. And when they said, what are you doing, fella, working outside with young people? He said, my job is to make myself useful. Right? I mean, it's as simple as that. make yourself useful, but useful are in the terms determined by those that we engage with, simply enough. Many years later, of course, we've had this concept of territory in detached youth work, and we've said, of course, we understand territory in terms of geography. Detached youth workers work outside, in communities, on street corners, but territory is determined by their, and I emphasize their, young people, their definitions of space, of needs, of interests, of concerns, of lifestyles, not just the geography, not just the geography. What I'm getting at is that we've lived a life, as my pal Axel Paul says, who works at Tübingen University in Germany, of conflicting models. The one that we talk about, of course, youth work, the principles participation, is something about democracy, something about citizenship, it's shared decision making, and as I said, it relies on young people's intrinsic motivations, which are exemplified by detached youth work. But what Axel argues is that actually, to a significant degree, we've been working to a different model, what he calls the activation agenda. And you can see in the language on my slide that actually our job is to encourage and enable young people to become employable, whether they like it or not. The point about this is that that's based on extrinsic motivation. Yeah, we have to prod them from outside. It's in the process of externalisation, or as a detached youth work said to me in Manchester recently, she said, well, in our place we call them outcomes driven youth work, and I'm on record as having tried to problematise, to contest the concept of outcomes, because what I argue is that outcomes, there is a clue in the word, is what comes out. It seems completely implausible to me that you can have outcomes at the beginning. Yeah, they come at the end of a process. They're catalysed by conversations. They shape shift on the basis of interests and motivations. They come at the end, not at the beginning. So, as Paul shows, where needs are externalised, rather than identified and clarified through discussion, conversation, dialogue, almost inevitably they rely on incentivisation. This is what I call the pizza trick. Yeah, so there's me, it's more than a year ago up in the northeast. I get to the youth centre, a big crowd outside. I look at my watch thinking it's not open now, and I say, is it open? No. They say, yes, it is open, but we're not going in. Why aren't you going in? Because we've been told we can only come in if we do X, Y, and Z. So I look inside, there's no young people inside. Yeah, until, of course, the pizza trick comes along. Yeah, come in, we'll give you a pizza. Do you know what I mean? There's a certain kind of perversity about it. To me, it's a missed trick. You know, you focus on the processes and you're going to get good outcomes. The point, again, I'm trying to make as firmly as I can, that all this has been blown out the water under COVID. We've gone back to just making ourselves generally useful, really trying to engage with needs as determined by the young people and communities that they're a part of. Of course, you don't know. That's the point. That's the point. That's the Socratic point. You don't know what the needs are until you get in a conversation with them. That's why, and I've argued this again for some years, the best of practice is what I call uncertainty appreciative practice. You have to listen first, and it's going to move and shift. It's on the basis of the uncertainties of every good conversation. You can't have a democratic conversation if you know the outcomes of your conversation. If two people are asked to make a decision, we know what they're going to come up with before they start having a conversation. What's the point in having the bloody conversation? It's an iterative process. Iterative means that there are steps that we take, we reflect on them, we change, we move, we get rid of this, we do a bit more of that. Continuous improvement. Good youth work is iterative. Socrates knew this. That's why he realised that if this process was going to work effectively, the best thing you can do is just ask bloody good questions. So this hallmark of question-based practice, the methodology and pedagogy of asking questions, is absolutely critical to detached youth work. And it also reminds us that in that sense, the project is detached from institutional life that has got a desire to pull people in a certain direction, sometimes for good reasons, I accept. Yeah, and of course that also makes us remember that when we talk about detached, it's the worker, detached from institutional life, the very thing that drives some young people away, not the young person, that's a deficit model, of course. Yeah, our job is to stand on the side of young people, not even on the line, and certainly not on the other side of the line, and to do so is to listen to what they say. All this can be pulled into one central idea, and that is that in youth work we value young people's values. And I'll say that again, we value young people's values. That sounds easy to say, but of course in reality it's very hard work. I think about the many young people I've worked with whose, if you like, value system I absolutely abhorred. But that is not the point. It's not about my value system, it's about theirs. This, of course, is an ethical position. No matter what they think about the world, we have to respect them and value them as individuals. Our job is to get them involved in conversations about why they think that they do, not to insist that they believe certain things. This is exemplified under COVID, because it has not been, as much as some people have asked them to do this, it has not been the job of detached youth workers to go out to tell young people to go home. It has not been their job to do that. Their job has been to engage them in the reasons why they're out there, let's say flouting COVID regulations, to get them to think as well as possible, often from a moral point of view, through these good questioning takes about why they're making these decisions. It's not for us to tell them to go home, right? It's us, we have to explain, yeah? That starts with E. I say that because I was fascinated to listen to Cressida Dick, the chief of the Metropolitan Police in London, explaining that there's no way you can police yourself to COVID compliance. She says, what I've done with all my officers in London, I've told them about the 4 E's. I thought, this is going to be good. What's the 4 E's, Cressida? She says, explain, educate, encourage, and then, and only then, enforce. Sounds a lot like detached youth work, doesn't it? Of course, as I've said, we don't have the power to enforce, nor do we want to have that power. Think of it this way. When they're handing out cards of how you can control the world, there are what I call hard power cards. That's detention, that's exclusion from school, that's putting somebody in the nick, I don't know. But there's a whole series of other cards. These are the soft power cards of listening carefully, conversation, inquiry, argumentation, and so on and so on. So when you work on the street, you put your hands out, they give you all the cards, and then they chop off the hand. They chop off the hand with all the hard power cards. They fall to the floor. So you've got to learn to use the other kinds of cards, these democratic cards, very, very skillfully. Now, that's the point about working outside. It's outside these power systems that young people are so often subject to. The interesting thing about teaching so many workers who work inside, including some teachers, as I said recently, is that when they go back inside, at least now, they'll be more aware of how power works and probably more able to recognise any abuse of it in their own actions and in those of others. So anybody who studies detached youth work, even if you never work on the street again, will be benefited from it because you've learned about power, authority and control. It's an exploration of values. And my word, what about those values? What's come to the fore in the last year is a whole series of values that got kicked down the street a bit over a number of years. They are social values, the values of care, of compassion, collaboration, solidarity, and community. Now, I want to argue something even weirder, right? And that is that this world of values, stay with me now because this is quite a difficult point, this world of values has superseded the world of value. I'll say it again, values have come into prominence over value. It's important in youth work, it's also important in how you run a country. What I'm talking about is the concept of value as an economic concept. Okay? Everything is determined by economics. This is, of course, cost-benefit analysis. It's as affected youth work as it has all other public services. Yeah, to justify working with young people involved in antisocial behaviour and criminality, we have to construct an argument that it saves the state X amount of pounds from their incarceration. Everything's economised. But what's happened under COVID is this economic ideology has been turned radically upside down. What we've done is we've focused on human values, not least keeping people alive. We've realised that you can rebuild an economy at any time, but you can't bring people back who have died. We've put values in front of value. This is the potential legacy. We can remember this. We can go into communities, have a discussion about values to determine what the work needs to look like. And then we can work out how much it's going to bloody cost, not the other way around. Mark Carney said it in his Rees lectures. You can rebuild an economy, but you can't bring lives back. Now, remember that Carney is no longer the governor of the Bank of England. Actually, he's working on climate change. And he described it in these terms. Think about Amazon, the corporation, the most valuable thing in the world economically. Think about the Amazon, as in the rainforest. In economic terms, it has got no value. It has got no value until, that is, you chop it down, right? You turn it into timber. That's when it's got economic value. In the current understanding of the world, it's got no intrinsic value. But COVID has turned all this upside down. We've got a values-based agenda deciding what we need to do and not the other way around. Can you imagine the implication of that for how we run our services and for the practice of so many services? So it seems to me, this is where I'm getting way above my station, that this humble methodology that is intrinsic to detached youth work has actually, I don't know, I'll probably stretching my neck out to say that it's catalysed a new understanding at a global level. But you get the point. The methodology that we see in good youth work, the values-based practices that determine what we should do, and then we work out how we're going to deliver that cost-wise, are actually the ones that the world has used in the last year. It's fascinating to me. Absolutely fascinating. So our methods, our pedagogies might be precisely, our processes are proved that this is the way to do it. And the irony, of course, is that the very thing that the cost benefit analysis model is trying to do, which is to be efficient and effective, has been proven not to be efficient and effective. It's the process-based methodologies that get the job done. They are more efficient and they are more effective. Now, just a thought also on some of these wider community values. You remember this, you know, there was a call out for 250,000 volunteers to help in all their communities, and within 24 hours 750,000 people had signed on. My God, what does that say about values? Yeah, I was one of them. 3 months later, I phoned up my local hub and I said, what about me, dude? You haven't given me anything to do. They said, Graeme, there's so many people volunteered, you know, we've had very little work to spread out. Yeah, what an amazing acclamation of these kinds of values. Of course, our job now is to retain this revigorated, energised civil society and get it involved in the support and benefit of young people. But I do want to, about this from a kind of historical point. This is my life. you know, I can't tell you how many years I've been involved in the work that we're talking about today, but I started in community work, and then I got a job as a community education worker, and then I worked in community development, and then my job became community and youth worker, which was all right, but I never thought a minute about any of it. And then what happened is I got a piece of paper saying, we're changing your job title to youth and community worker, not community youth, but youth and community. I thought, what a waste of bloody money, right? And then, of course, we all went back to work thinking it was irrelevant. But of course, what happened after that is we became youth workers. And after that, we became youth support workers. And after that, we became targeted youth support workers. And God only knows what comes up. But you can see the chronology. You can see the policy-driven trajectory. And COVID has taught us we need to turn this juggernaut upside down again. The youth workers that have worked effectively are those who always maintained a commitment to community engagement. The detached youth workers who were out there known in the communities have not found it difficult to engage. All the new folk who've gone out there saying to me, it's difficult to engage. Well, you don't know the bloody community. It's just how it is. We've learned about the value of community. And my life, my chronology, my history demonstrates, I think, the flight from community and youth work, and we need to get it back. But what about other social values? Consider the value that we've ascribed to social space, public space. We've learned to value it in different ways, to use it differently. We've all gone out walking in our local communities in the hour that's been available, and we've learned to make our streets safer through interesting, modest little projects. Here's my pal Paul, who lives down the road from me, active in creating a school street, to close the street off so that young people can walk safely. They can walk safely down the street, spaced out on the way to school. And look what he says. Nobody has dissed it. Nobody's trying to drive down the bloody road. Yeah, they've all respected it. And all I can hear is the chatter of kids and birds. Yeah, noise. I mean, my God, what did COVID do for noise? Yeah, and all of a sudden, things, modest things, start having an effect. Yeah, there's a bit of joy around in these very difficult times. We've started talking about low traffic neighbourhoods, the 15-minute neighbourhood. Our local centres, as distinct from our city centres that many of us have not been able to get to, have been reinvigorated. We've spent a few more quid there, less noise, less pollution, more fun. And of course, we know that this ties in absolutely with what young people tell us. Every single consultation we've ever done, this is what young people talk about. They talk about the climate, they talk about the environment, they talk about environmental stuff. They're number one in having concerns for these things, but they're also talking about wanting to be free to walk, to cycle, to move, mobility as geographers, teachers. And we've done radical things. I mean, radical, but modest. You know, we've pinched a bit of the road back. Yeah, this is something that will never be taken away. You know, this kind of desire to get back to normal, but the new normal is we've pinched a bit of the street back. This is an aerial view of the street in the centre of Leeds where I live, right through the middle of the bloody town centre, 2 lanes in either direction. And to first of all, to create space for social distancing, we set off. I'm involved in this kind of work, just painting over things, saying, you know, give yourself a bit more room, a few bollards, and now bollocks, let's just do it. You know, we've gone from 4 lanes to 1. It becomes a public space where people can connect with each other, have a bit of a discussion, perhaps, if you want to be romantic. But we've, excuse me, I've missed something there. Let me go back. Excuse me. I don't know what I did there. I'll get to it. There we go. My apologies. Yeah, so we need to remember that this idea of, you know, taking a bit of time back from the street, taking a bit of space back from the cars, 1938, the Street Playground Act. And in all the places that you live, you'll find at least 1 or 2 of these things. I think we just basically let it slip a bit. And COVID has taught us that we can get it back a bit. And I want to hold on to it. I want to hold on to it because it's good for young people. And if it's good for young people, it's good for everybody. Of course, the point I'm making about the flight from community is that this construction of youth work, as individuated, as targeted, especially at those so-called at risk, yeah, it's broken our links with the very thing that you need under COVID. You need youth work to be a form of community work. It's almost like we've been a little bit complicit, but there we go. Anyway, I'm getting to the end now. Where do we go now? Well, first of all, there's going to be a row, a holy row. We've got on the one hand the Institute of Fiscal Studies and their solution. COVID could cost children £350 billion in earnings due to lost learning. Yeah. What's the solution? The solution is, according to the IFS, young people have to go to school, and when they get back, that is, an extra 2 hours a day. They've got to go on Saturday, and they can kiss their ass to summer holiday, right? That's what catch-up means in a cost-benefit analysis model. On the other side of the ring, we've got the play lobby, the call for summer play to help pupils recover, yeah. Instead of extra lessons, summer schools and longer days, let's just get them out. Let's just help them to find their relationships again, to engage and be active, to be friendly and whatever else. I suppose you could argue we could have both, but we're going to have to think about time and temporality different if we want to do that. But there will be a fight, and what I want to explore with you guys is where we're going to stand. Where are we going to stand? And in order to decide where we're going to stand, we're going to have to do what I've been talking about. We're going to have to review our values, and we're going to have to articulate our values very, very clearly. Now, in terms of the IFS, I did make me smile a little bit because it's relatively recently that I reread Illich's little book. And I won't read the quotes out, but to paraphrase Illich always said, whenever there's a problem about education, why is the answer always more school? Why is the answer always more school? The point about Illich, of course, is he argued that you could learn in all sorts of places. It is absolutely ridiculous, in my view, to say that young people haven't learned anything in the year that they've had off school. It's ridiculous. They've learned all sorts of things. They've learned some bad things, I don't doubt. But, you know, this is to fundamentally disregard social learning. You know, the stuff that they've learned from the families, the stuff that they've learned from the neighbours, the stuff that they've learned from seeing volunteers in their communities. They've done a lot of social learning, and many youth workers have been on that, encouraging that social analysis and social learning. So if Illich had anything to say, it reminds us that school is not the only place that young people learn. You know, there's a contestation going on that's new. It's been in the wings, but it's now and open. And as we move on to working out what the hell we're going to do about education and catch up on whatever else, what I want us to be involved in is a discussion about what education is, not just what it's for, but what it is. And that kind of discourse on well-being and whatever else, that's part of it. But let's not lose touch with the conceptual terrain of community education, community learning, social learning, informal learning, and whatever else. Of course, there's also an essential point about this, and that is that there are and have been voices missing. Whoever asked young people what COVID has done to their lives, and who's asking them now what they think about the prospect of not having a summer holiday at all, going to school for the entirety of it. That's our job, isn't it? We've got to bring young people's voices into the discussion about the future of education. It reminds me of Ulrich Beck, the sociologist and philosopher. He always said, you've got to get away from the polarities, yeah? We've got to get beyond false choices. It's not so much a matter of either or. We have to always ask, maybe it could be and also. You know, we could just work with time differently, such that they do get their academic learning, but they get all these other things that are important. we can contest the concepts of age-related expectations that seem to dominate so much of this. Now, I did want to quickly mention the new curriculum for Wales. I've been involved in that project over a period of years, up until relatively recently, and what's going on there, to my mind, is really quite fascinating. And if ever COVID would have created a set of ideas, it would create the ideas that are being talked about for the new curriculum of Wales. That's why we can say it was its thinking has been innovative, and it was there going on before COVID even turned up. It's on the money. This fusion of informal and formal education, the chance for youth workers and teachers to work, in parity of esteem. Yeah, and of course it's been part of those discussions to reimagine assessment. I wrote an article, you found that online as well, where I said the most interesting thing educationally about COVID is that we realise that exams are not essential. The clamour to get back to exams, but not an analysis of the impact of exams on people. And Graeme Donaldson and others in Wales, they're doing a good job. We want to be and need to be involved. It reminds me of what Mark Smith said. Informal educators are teachers. Informal educators are teachers. So this merger. And I do want to draw attention to one of the peculiar and extraordinary realities that as youth work's gone online and as schooling's gone online, it's almost like we're in the same game, where all of us, youth workers and teachers, we're all staring at those screens, and youth workers are phoning me up telling me, oh God, I'm trying to do this thing online and the kids are, messing about, and the teachers that I know are saying, oh God, the young people are prattling around in the background. And yet there are some teachers, and I would argue many youth workers, their engagement talents are so good that they've got them online. So we are the same. We're different kinds of educators, but we're all educators. We're all staring at that screen, trying to work out what engagement looks like. And of course, the clever ones amongst those people are the ones who realise you've got to be interested in what they're interested in. You've got to listen to what they say. You've got to get some conversation and humour into it. And you know what? It starts looking a lot like detached youth work again. And of course, the teachers have worked out that they've had to work without the cards of detention. You can't isolate somebody from school when they're already at bloody home, can you? It's ridiculous. Yeah, so all these things create a conversation that we can have because we've shared this experience. And the new stuff, the stuff about domain, general intelligence, adaptive intelligence, let's get on with that kind of stuff, because that's a place where youth work can make massive contributions. Now, a couple more. I want to say that some of the gains that we've made, they're a bit shaky. So we've got work to do to secure them. The most obvious one, we have made some progress on this, was the everyone in policy, the provision of accommodation for rough sleepers. I worked 4 years with rough sleepers. I've been very much interested in this all my working life. But the truth is that funding that was so successful, 96% of rough sleepers took up that offer. It ended after just a few months, and lots of charities, of course, were angry about it. But the point about this, I don't want to argue about the politics. The point is that when people told me, as they did for years, well, you know what, rough sleeping is just one of those things. You can't actually do anything about it. But now we need to hold their feet to the fire and say, you're talking rubbish, mate. COVID has proved we can do these things. It's no longer even reasonable to suggest we cannot. So what else might we think of? The complete rebuilding of a national youth service? Why not? Why not? So, concluding remarks. COVID, mixed picture, a complexity that requires us to think critically about the detail of it. As Beck says, the potential to move from either or to and also, which means that either or means, yes, of course, respect for individual values, but a bit more of a shout out for social and community values. The role of methods and pedagogies, especially this kind of conversational thing that's so elemental to detached youth work, which in another way of describing it is a form of values education, the very thing that criminologists have been pointing to in terms of progressive responses to crime. What they're saying is that young people are not learning moral language through their academic learning. The point being that when you get into conflict as a young person, you need moral language. So again, youth work and detached youth work has got the capacity to do that. Inquiry-based methodologies, questioning techniques, conversation, not youth or community and or youth and community, individual and community. And finally, we've got the point about participation. COVID has shown us, it's given light to a history in which the way to really be effective, the way to really be efficient is to listen carefully to what young people have to say about what they need. Of course, to argue with them. We've got our knowledge, we've got our understandings. Get involved in a dialogue about what we should do. That's what needs-led work means. Internally generated through conversation, not externally by contract cultures. That's the characteristics of good, democratic, ethical and principled youth work. And of course, COVID was unexpected. It's true to say that it was unprecedented. It's a word that we abuse, but it's true. And of course, this sense of the unknown, this sense of the uncertain, once again, detached youth work pops up as an uncertainty appreciative practice. Life is like that. So education needs to be like that. This sense of working outside, it's not just a physical thing, it's a metaphorical and philosophical thing. Working outside means being uncertainty appreciative. So let's go back to what I said before. Just use the simple stuff. Let's get involved in a conversation about what was good and bad. Create some resources which we can reflect on in order to understand where we might go with this. Let's not be cynical about those who say don't know. Just engage with lived experience of COVID. And if I have got one more academic reference, I've given you a couple, it is Rebecca Abbas's work on citizen participation. And she says quite simply, yes, of course do this, but bloody get on with doing what they say, because what you're able to do then is create what she calls the demonstration effect. And when young people see, as wider communities see, that we take heed of what they say and act upon them, you know what? They come back for more. And all your worries about having to extrinsically motivate them can go, and we can get back to the intrinsic motivations of young people and wider communities. Right, I've done. Thanks very much. Somebody talk to me.
Brilliant, thank you. Does anyone want to ask any questions?
I've got one, Graeme. You point to saying that there's an opportunity for detached youth workers and street-based workers to, through COVID, to kind of show what they're made of, if you like. Do you think that that's been noticed nationally, of what the youth workers and detached youth workers have done?
I do think that. Yesterday I was in conversation with youth workers who said their managers have said, we don't want you working outside, nor have they been able to work outside ever since. Now, you know, that's a local decision making. I like to think, you know, youth workers have got a role in that decision making. But the broader picture is that up and down the land, many detached youth workers and a few others, they've worked right from the beginning. What they did was, especially those who had community links, they were asked and responded to, or volunteered, as so many people did, their services. They connected to their local hubs, and they were given very quickly, especially in my city, Leeds, local essential status. And of course, under this lockdown in England I'm speaking about, all youth workers that were professionally qualified have been given essential status, key worker status. Yeah, so it's moved on from a recognition of the value at the local essential level to others. But it's a mixed picture. It hasn't been the case for everybody. There's had to be arguments in some places. I've done a lot of work with colleagues in Newham in East London, and right from the beginning they said, let's go out, and they've done more work than ever before. And you know, the legacy for them is that community just thinks they're fantastic. And when it comes to arguing about the money in Newham in the future, you know what they're going to vote for, those residents. They're going to vote for those guys. So mixed picture, but yes, it's been very, very successful and, you know, super to observe up and down the land.
Cheers. Thanks for that.
Well, let me just chuck it back. You know, what's people's experiences? What's been good? Let's just do something appreciative for a couple of minutes. What's been good? What have we learned from our experiences of the last year that can help inform the future?
Like, hi guys, it's me, Juma here.
Hi, Juma.
One of the street-based workers. I think to answer the question, my point of my personal perspective, I think I've learned more and identify more the needs of young people, because as a society we only do what's available for us we can see. But then when I go in the street talking to these young people, ask them what do you want to do, they all say we have nothing to do, and that shows us as people working in the street that when this all comes down, we have a more idea to take all the activities they need to go back to put them back in the community.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, it's precisely as I described, isn't it, Juma? You know, and that's why I am having a pop when I say asking young people what they want to do, independently of any other questions, is the worst of youth work questions. If you say to them, tell me about your life, tell me about your experiences, they're on it, aren't they? They're on it. They're generating all sorts of what I would call material. And then when I say, okay, let's have a look at what you've come up with in our reflection on our experiences, what does that tell you about what we need to do? And you won't struggle then. You're going to struggle then to shut them up. So you've got to do my little picture. If you want to think forward, think back, respect and value, and get them to respect and value their lived experience, because that's what generates the resources with which we can start reflecting on what we want to do. And then they will say, I've just finished a big social action project in Leeds, and that's all we did. What's good about where you live? What's bad about where you live? Mapping systems, mapping technologies, all sorts of, generate a whole series of ideas, and then I write it all up, take it back, and I say, okay, that's what you came up with. What does that mean in terms of what we need to do, and what do you want to do in your community? Floodgates open. Come on then, I've been to South Wales. There's plenty of,
I think Dale's got a question. Yeah. Dale?
Is another question, not related with this one, so I'll let you finish with this one.
You're all right, go on, crack on.
Yeah, so I was just wondering whether there's any best practice examples available in the UK or around Europe where street-based workers have been able to work in a digital space with young people as well while they're out on the streets.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have a little pop at you as well now, fella.
Thanks.
I don't like the concept of best practice, right? That sounds a weird thing to say because everybody talks about it. What I like is good practice. And if there ever was such a thing as best practice, it's good local practice, right? It's the contextually appreciative practice. Yeah, so the idea that we can take something off a shelf and it works everywhere. So what I've learned from talking to colleagues all around the world is that all of them are interested in and have used the digital stuff, but it's worked well in some places, not in others, and they've had to adapt things. Yesterday, youth workers were telling me that they've used the breakout functions in online spaces, because and deliberately not putting youth workers in the rooms. So they say to young people, okay, we're having a chat about this, right? You lot go off and have a chat for 10 minutes and then come back. And what does it do? Very symbolically, it says, and trust to them to value their own conversation and opinions. And then, of course, they come back after 10 minutes, no youth worker in the space, and they say what they've talked about. There's a kind of a liberation to just enabling them to do that, which is precisely the comment from Tarleton 150 years ago. Help informing associations. You know, in response to the story that I heard that I've just told you, it made me remember about a group that I worked with of young people who lived in a squat, who kind of basically were like anarchist musicians. And they would come and see me and they say, Graeme, we've got a gig in this pub. You've got a minibus. Take us with all our kit to the pub. And I used to drop them off and pick them up 3 hours later. That's all they valued me for. But I'm all right with that. Yeah, because my job is as much to facilitate their association activities as to do anything else. Good youth work, good community-based youth work does not necessitate always the youth worker being present.
But the other things is, I think poor education as well. I think, you know, that people who know or can associate with substance, but there's little knowledge, or there's little people don't seem to associate gambling as a problem.
Yeah, well,
I know that's back to that normalisation, is what you said. But yeah, and a lot of it is brushed under the carpet. You know, when it becomes problematic, it's where to go to, because it's like, oh, I don't know, is it a problem? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that is, of course, one of the things that we've also learned, and some people knew before, about the digital space. If you can create platforms, as many youth workers have done, or use existing ones that secure young people's anonymity, they can go online, yeah, and they can ask questions about substance misuse and whatever else, with some freedom. And many youth workers, if we look at the Icelandic models of digital, they've got an entire team in Iceland dedicated to online youth work, and they've been very, very busy under COVID. But that's existed for years, and there's a whole section of the work that they do that's completely anonymous. So people come in and they just say, you know, this is my issue, and it's responded. It's treated in good faith. So some of these digital platforms enable this kind of stuff. The other point I made before, you know, I've had access, many people have had, if you go on Eventbrite after today and look at all the free conferences around the world, it is staggering what you can get involved in. Recently, I got involved in a conference based in North America, yeah, and it's just free like everything else. And I was able to learn from all these colleagues in Canada and North America. I wouldn't be able to do that normally. So this is this point about either or, contextual understanding or whatever else. So, you know, there are some, Dan Moxon is a guy to follow on Twitter. He's a bit of a visionary when it comes to digital and online learning in British youth work. But there's a kind of a diversity within it. And the thing to do is to try to work out which, you know, with young people, what's working for them. In some places, it's been really fantastic. And in others, youth workers are reporting that young people really don't want to play ball with being in digital spaces. So, as ever, it's probably a bit of both, and as teachers call it, blended, you know. Anybody else?
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. On that very subject, of course, I need to do a shout out for the webinars that the Fed's been organising. There's one on the 15th of March for women who are involved in detached youth work. Just go to the Fed website and click on for that. You know, you might be new to detached youth work or simply just interested in it. Some of the international webinars have been fantastic, and I did mention that what we've learned from having one now facilitated had 40 odd countries on it, and there's this universality. You know, the low threshold practices have just proved themselves. You know, at times of crisis, they prove themselves. You know, and again, let's employ that language of efficiency and effectiveness, because they just work. They just work. I was thinking somebody had pulled me about something. Come on, Carla, you asked me a question.
I don't really know.
Come on, tell me about what's it been like for you this last year.
It's been harder because I'm a student as well, so
Yes.
it's so online.
What's been good? What's been good?
I think it was good because like I've never experienced something so different. So
Right.
I've had to push myself out of my comfort zone
Right,
to actually like try and engage with young people on the street when
right.
I'm just trying to start making relationships because I just started.
So you've learned that if you get your toe forward a bit, you know, things start happening.
Yeah, I definitely got to push myself a little bit harder.
Fantastic, fantastic. And so I hope some of my words mean something to you. You know, detached youth work is an uncertainty appreciative practice. You know, we like uncertainty because uncertainty represents, as the philosopher Dewey said, it's like a space that young people can inhabit without us dominating it. And that's why I love working on the street, because it creates a set of circumstances in which, you know, it really is possible for young people to feel like they've got some control over their lives. They can say what they think, they can do what they think, and they can walk away and they can tell, and they can say to you, as they did with me in the East End of London, see you later, you northern bastard, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, there's a kind of a humour to it, but you don't know what's going to happen when you turn the next corner. And that's why you've got to be good at thinking.
Can I ask?
It's all coming now.
Sorry. Can I ask, for those who are working on the street and stuff, are you finding that more young people are engaging now? I mean, now they haven't got wherever they like to go and stuff, everything's closed. Are they more likely to engage with you guys? I'm finding my young people who are like anxious learners and anxious, don't want to leave the house, actually want to leave the house now because it's almost been forced on them that they can't. Now they're actually wanting to get out and engage.
I think that's interesting, Natalie. Yeah, I mean, what we're getting, Chris McIntosh, a very, very experienced worker in Manchester, wrote some stuff that was fantastic recently. Of course, it's the old story, isn't it? Young people are not all the same. They're all very different. He says that young people have engaged with COVID very, very, you know, differently. You know, there are those who are really quite fearful, desperately fearful and anxious about it. And there's those who are a bit more ambivalent, a bit more passive or whatever. And right at the other end, they're what he calls the invincibles. Nothing can get me, do you know what I mean? And you've probably met a few of them on the street. But the point is that young people appear, as we might imagine if we just think critically and learn about our experiences, they move from one set of conditions from another. And that means that our conversations and our questions need to change into relation to their changing understanding and experience. But the really interesting way, as I've suggested, is just, what's it been like for you? Don't go wagging your bloody finger. You know, some youth workers have wagged their finger a bit too much. As I said, they just ended up with nobody to work with. So we've got to get back to this really kind of critical conversation methodology. And that's where young people are saying and reporting to Detached Youth, well, you know what, I've never thought about that. Yeah, I've never thought about that. And they have changed their behaviour, fascinatingly, on the basis of their own decisions, not on external forces.
Would you, sorry to interrupt, would you encourage all youth workers who haven't done detached work to get out there and give it a little bit of a go and see what that kind of side is?
Well, there's a yes and a no to that. And I and others at the Fed have put together, it's modest and it's minimum, I have to say that, a kind of a package where there are 3 elements to it for those who, you know, got youth work histories but not of working outside. And the first thing that we try to do in that training is say, you've got to understand what detached youth work is. Some of the things I've mentioned today, of course, you've got to understand the philosophies and the aims and purposes. But the second thing that I absolutely demanded was in this package, if you like, is that stuff about understanding the community. And one of the big issues we've got now is, and of course I celebrate an interest in working outside, but if you haven't done at least a modest amount of work working out what the community is like before you crack on, you're going to really struggle. And in the old days, I'm looking at Stephen now, we used to call this, you know, community profiling, reconnaissance, whatever else, but it's absolutely fundamental to detached youth work. You've got to know your communities. And I say again, as I said in my presentation, those detached youth workers who've got good histories of not just done reconnaissance and community profiling work at the beginning of their tenure, but having done it as part of their ongoing work, they've had no problem engaging with communities. No problem at all. It's the ones who haven't done that who are struggling. So there has to be an investment in doing a little bit of research before you crack on a bit. The third component I might mention is it's what I've tried to suggest is important today, this kind of, you know, reflection on what you do. You've got to learn as you go. And the best way to do that is, and this is a point for Carla, of course, is, you know, just share your experiences with others, and then, you know, all those different experiences go into the mix and everybody's learning everything from everybody's point of view.
Thanks.
I've had enough. I think you're ready for somebody else, are you? You've had enough of me.
I've got one question.
Go on, then.
So I'm one of the youth service managers, and so I just wanted to know your thoughts about data and, you know, how we can go about capturing the impact that we're making. You know, what are your thoughts about that? Obviously, there's various methods of doing that, and, you know, there's always a story about behind the baseline, which we often can't measure or can't identify as youth workers.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I could send you my doctorate. That's 110,000 words, because it's all about this. Can I summarise that into a couple of sentences? Fundamentally, what I argue is that there's been a bit of a mission drift here as well. We've got the language of monitoring and evaluation. I worked on a European project where, to the truth be known, I suggested it happened, and I managed to get some money from the EU to do it. And it was an evaluation of detached youth work evaluation systems, right? An evaluation of evaluation. I think that's what I called it, actually. I can send it to you. And what I found was, and having talked to workers all over Europe, the truth is almost none of them are doing evaluation. They're all doing monitoring, right? And we have to remember what these words mean. It's back to concepts analysis. There is a clue in the word evaluation. Evaluation. It's an inquiry into values, which is why I suggest to you that when you ask people what's good about your work experience and what's bad about it, that's evaluation. Good and bad, the language evaluation. Monitoring is about numbers. Monitoring is how cost-benefit analysis works. I'm not mad that this stuff is going to go away overnight, but what I've argued today, I hope, is that at least we might disrupt a view of the world that thinks that you can enumerate everything, turn everything into numbers. So there needs to be a discussion between monitoring and evaluation. But the big trick, and the best of tricks, is always to have young people central to the impact discussion. Yeah, and that's why twice today I show you my silly little H diagram. Ask them what's good, what's bad, as a reflection on lived experience, and then ask them what needs to change. And my final commentary, and I learnt this, I think I felt it before, I understood it to some degree, but I worked a lot in the Nordic countries as well. They talk about documentation. In Norwegian, they put a K in it. I always write it with a K to make me remember my time there. And documentation is the process, as with a documentary on the telly, that tells the story of the very first conversation right through to include the outcomes. And the truth is that monitoring has been a form of self-harm for youth work, because it only considers what comes out at the end. And so much of the value of youth work, it's in the lived experience, the journeys and the processes. So we need to do much more documentary stuff. I've got a lovely film of a project that lasted 2.5 years. It's on YouTube, a whole hour, just a whole story. It's the finest piece of documentation about what good youth work looks like in all its nuances, all the stuff, all the voices of young people capture. So multimedia, you know, young people speaking to camera, creating their own media as well. This is all part of it. And I know we always say that people ask us for numbers, and they will continue to ask us for numbers. But we all know also that they all like a good story as well. So look at the NYA storytelling projects, look at the work of Tanya Desacqua, her work at King's University about collecting the testimony of youth workers and many thousands of young people about what youth work's like for them. But more important than everything, it's about getting other people involved in that conversation. And yesterday, just to finish off my point, again in conversation, there was a participation workers in the Northeast telling me that when they'd done consultation with young people, which is a form of evaluation, the young people were concerned that their comments were a bit harsh. Yeah, and I thought that was quite fascinating. But what I was troubled by was the sense that these harsh comments might be part of a process in which they get together with the counsellors and others and they have it out. And it might be that good questions from counsellors and from youth workers get them to rethink their harsh comments. It might be actually they realise that those harsh comments were reasonable and on the money, but it's not enough. The problem with consultation, it's got these defined ends in it. It's a temporal problem. Yeah, it's you finish the consultation. Participation doesn't work like that. It continues. It's got a life. It's got longevity, and it goes on. And that's why it's very interesting, because it's temporally appreciative, which is one of the dimensions of good uncertainty appreciative practice. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Graeme. That was brilliant.
I'm going to hang around and listen to you guys for a bit, but unfortunately I've got to do a bit of teaching this afternoon. What I would say, I can come back to join you, Stephen, later in the day if you want me to just get involved in the discussion about the network development. But is that any use to you?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Graeme. Yeah. So
I'll hang around till lunchtime and then I'll come back for that. So it's been lovely talking to you all. I hope in future I can stand in front of you as well, because you know, I quite like that as well. But I wish you all a very well, and remember, it's really is good work, this stuff, and you know, get on with it. See you later.
Thank you, Graeme.
Thank you. Next is Matt Parry. He's worked within the youth service for around 25 years, as well as working on the youth and community professional development course at Cardiff Metropolitan University. So, to your screen now.
Good morning, all. How are we doing? See if we can share. Good to see some names I remember from previous lives. As just been said, my name is Matt Parry, and I used to work for Cardiff Youth Service for very many years, and delivering and managing some